All right, so we are recording. Thanks everyone for joining. This call is kind of a starting of a conversation, right? So this is a conversation that we're probably going to continue with a few different folks over the next few weeks, and really talking about the time that we're in, the situation that we all find ourselves in with COVID-19, with social upheaval, with all the stuff that's kind of going on right now. It's good for us to have open dialogue about what's going on, how are we dealing with it, how are we actually supporting each other. And as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, right, how do we explicitly and intentionally define culture? And you probably hear Jonah screaming downstairs, so forgive me, because he's very excited about Fortnite, so that's his thing right now. But as we are trying to build culture, right, culture is not something that just, I mean, it can spontaneously happen, but good culture actually requires intentionality. It requires people getting engaged, getting involved. And this is a start for having some of that conversation around how do we build culture here at Family Life in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of social upheaval, in the middle of all the things that are going on in the world. How are we building out culture, and how do we make sure that we're getting as many people involved in that conversation? All right. Everyone cool with that? Thumbs up or nod your heads, whatever. Okay, cool. So I've got a little preface, and then I've got like 4 or 5 questions. This is a safe space, right? So there's no judgment on anything that you're going to say here. Obviously, you know, we're wanting to make sure that we're getting everybody engaged and everyone involved. So there's no like right or wrong answers to any of the questions that I'm going to ask. And frankly, the more involved you guys get, the better it's going to be for everybody getting to watch this and participating in future conversations. So we live in a really unprecedented time, right? So there's no, Pastor and I were talking about this the other day, there's no rules, there's no protocol, there's no expectations around like what's supposed to work in this environment. And there's no ideas that are out there that are kind of like, this is the silver bullet that's going to fix how we build church or build community or survive during this time. Forget about just the church part of it. Just surviving is a little bit difficult, right? So we're all kind of doing our best. We're all trying to really figure out how to deal with COVID, with social upheaval, with all the things. And we see you guys fine, Mike and Heidi. We're good. But in light of all this, right, we're humans. We are dealing with the real world. We're living with real struggles, but we also serve a real God. And that's something the pastor likes to mention regularly. We are living this Christian life in the middle of all this stuff. So the call is about being honest, sharing a little bit about how we all are a part of this community and how we're doing life individually together, right? And as we're doing it apart. So any questions before we get started? It was kind of a little bit of a preamble. All right, cool. So I'm going to ask a couple of starting questions, and then we'll get into some deeper topics. So first question is anyone in your immediate circle of friends or family infected by COVID? Does anyone know someone who's been infected? And then if so, are they okay? If not, how do you feel about the fact that they're not? General question out there. Hi, Aubrey.
My father-in-law had it and my mother-in-law, and they're fine. It was, I don't know, what, like a month ago, 2 months ago?
Yeah, it wasn't, they probably had it. They didn't have a confirmed positive test.
Well, they weren't giving it. They had it. They had shortness of breath and the fever and the non-productive cough, you know. And he actually worked with somebody who was positive. So, you know. But yeah.
But they're doing okay. That's good.
Home for like a week and.
Good. Anybody else?
I had a cousin who had it in the end of March, and he was in his early 40s, healthy, avid marathon runner, and he was really touch and go for a while. He was intubated and induced into a coma for 9 days. So there were, some times where we weren't sure he was going to make it, and we were praying a lot. my small group, and Eddie's small group was also praying a lot for my cousin, and he's at home. Last I saw him, he says he still has residual effects. He can't run down the block, and he was a marathon runner, so that's still has lasting impact on his body. I have a classmate right now who has it, and she's also just kind of struggling at home, but she hasn't been hospitalized.
All right.
Yeah, I have had acquaintances, but it's more so I found myself, offering encouragement or support to people who do know people who have it, as they're struggling, because it's not, obviously it's the people who have COVID that it's a huge deal for them, but it's also the people who are all around them and connected to them who are struggling and not knowing how to support them or just dealing with the grief of their own fears of the people who are sick. So I've found myself in situations like that quite a bit recently, even though I don't really know anybody who's personally had it that I'm really connected to.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, so I haven't had anyone affected in my immediate family or family in general. Same thing, there's been coworkers that's had it and have had to isolate, but that's been about the extent of it.
Okay. And it's interesting, right? Like there's a lot of natural fear that goes along with it, right? So there's definitely a lot of dialogue going on around like, is it that bad? Is it just kind of an exacerbated flu? Like really, like where's the spectrum of, is it really dangerous, or is it just one of those things that we're going to have to kind of live with? And I think that it's interesting to hear a lot of that dialogue happen. And, it's interesting that we, even amongst our church group, we've got a lot of differing opinions of like, how serious is this thing? Or how much should we be worried about? And we'll talk a little bit about that fear, but, just an interesting thought around like, this is a real thing. It is happening. It is affecting people. Just because it's not necessarily affecting us individually yet, doesn't necessarily mean that it's not affecting us as a church or as a group or as a community. So thought that was kind of an interesting thought.
Hey, Josh, real quick.
Yes.
Josh. So I've had a couple. So one of the spiritual mentors in my life when I got out of Bible college, like the guy who took me under his wing and like helped me out in Texas and Louisiana was a guy named Tom Foster. And he's been in and out of the ICU, and he's home now. So it's been really scary for him and his family, and he's a healthy guy and all of that. And then as some of you may know or don't know, so my mom was going to have cataract surgery, and so they ran a test, and she came back positive, and but she has no symptoms, so my mom and Bob and her clients are currently in quarantine. So we'll see where else or who else gets tested, which the whole testing thing is an interesting journey of, if you want to pay for it, it's very easy to get a test, but if you don't have symptoms, they won't test you.
Interesting. Yeah, we could probably handle some of that conversation offline, but I'd imagine that we could probably find somewhere if we are wanting to be tested. So interesting. Miquon?
So you can call 211 and tell them that you've been exposed to somebody potentially direct contact with someone who's tested positive, and they'll test you. They may ask you symptomatic or asymptomatic or not, but they should be able to refer you to get tested.
They were, and it's 13 days out, which is hilarious. Like the first available schedule is 13 days out. You're like, okay, well, I don't know how that's going to help me. Like, I don't know if they're so busy that.
Yeah, they're also opening walk-up locations sites too. So the wait might be a little long while they're coming up, but look on the county's website and
Right.
for that stuff. So I know there's a walk-up location opening on Monday, I believe on Monday. I'm not sure where it is, but yeah, they're all over the county. There's one up here, like at the Escondido Performing Arts Center and things like that. So there are places to go.
There's a few CVS stores as well that are doing something similar. They're doing the drive-through, accepting anybody. You don't have to pay for it, like that sort of thing. So there are resources for those of you that are watching after the fact, after we're having this call. There are resources, and like Miquon said, call 211, but also you can look it up online. Anyway, resources are available. So to that point, right? So there's actually, I failed to mention, my dad was working with a pastor down in Ensenada in Mexico, and we just found out this last weekend, or even later last week, that the pastor actually passed away from COVID. And this was a man that my parents had gone down to his church numerous times. They'd taken all sorts of donations and also been working with him regularly. And it hit him pretty suddenly. He was a vet from way back. So he was a Marine vet. He was in the VA hospital here in San Diego, and he passed in the hospital just last week. So it has little by little been hitting closer and closer to home. And it's something that, we deal with a healthy level of respect for it, obviously, but we also, it is a bit of a roulette game in some ways of like, who's going to get severe symptoms and who's not. There's still a lot that's unknown there. So, so I guess one of the things that one of the questions that I was going to ask is, how are you doing, right? So we've talked about the bigger picture, right? People that you know or people that you're connected to, but how are you doing in your family, in your home, in your personal experiences? How are you doing during quarantine, in social distancing, staying sane, staying healthy, staying connected? Like what is it that you're doing right now? And then what are the challenges that you're experiencing as part of that process?
You're going to have to call on one of us.
That's all right.
Or I can go.
Jump in. Yeah.
I will. I'll go. So let's see. I think for me, it's been greatly challenging. It was my first year of choosing not to homeschool my kids. And the first year, all three of my kids were in school. And so I started working multiple different jobs for both my blog and advocate and blackout trafficking right in the middle of like our big season for the nonprofit, the human trafficking nonprofit I run. And then, the stuff I do with church, and pretty much I had to essentially like just try to keep survival level going with all those areas that I had responsibilities in and that I had, intentionally chosen to carve out time for so that I could be available to essentially go back to a version of homeschooling, but losing all the cool benefits of it, like going places. And that was definitely difficult, especially because, not only that, but each person in my family has their own struggles and their own issues. There's 6 of us who live in a tiny home. And there's mental health stuff going on. Each of my children had something different that they were struggling with. Myself, my husband also. And I think it was just incredibly hard to have all that kind of just coalesce all at once. It was just like, here, have this, and trying to help them work through that in a healthy way, including myself, and making sure that I was okay enough to be able to take care of them, which was really ended up being like, I kind of look back at the first 3 months of this being like, I don't really remember it. It just kind of happened. And for me, like I'm considered high risk because last summer I almost died of of a similar virus to COVID. I mean, it presents the same way. I was just shy of being intubated, but I was in the ICU and on a ventilator and all that stuff. And when I was released, the doctor said, never get any type of pneumonia again, avoid all respiratory illnesses. And so, then you have something like this, which, you're kind of like, well, I gotta take precautions, but you're just getting information and you're not really sure what's going on and what the wise thing is to do. And for me as a social person, it's a huge struggle because I like people and I want to be with people. And not only that, but I also want to build God's church. And how do you do that when you're at home and you can't really leave? And so I think it's been a huge struggle for different people in my family in their different ways, but for myself and having those responsibilities change that quickly and then still feel the pressure of feeling like I still have those responsibilities because I never really got a chance to say, hey, I can't carry those anymore. At the same time, you're trying to help those around you virtually via calls like this and try to figure out, navigate the news, navigate what's wise, try to figure out what God's speaking in all of it. I think it's a huge struggle, not just for me, but pretty much everybody that I've talked to. There's very few people that I've met who don't seem concerned or, have some large opinion about something dealing with it. So that's kind of how we've been, now I feel like I'm just kind of coming out of a rabbit hole in the past month being like, all right, I can, I think I've kind of figured this out a little bit. It's like having a newborn in a way, you just kind of disappear for 3 months and you can't think, and you're like, even though you think you're present, you're not. And then, after about 3 or 4 months, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I can adjust to this. I can figure it out. So I feel like I'm kind of getting to that place, I guess.
I think
maybe.
It definitely feels that way a little bit for a lot of folks, that we're kind of settling into a different new normal. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? How are you guys dealing with this? Don't everyone jump in at once.
I think we've just tried to make the best of it. For the first probably 1 or 2 weeks, we were not sane with the kids being home. And there was a point where we're just like, this is not going away. So how are we going to make the best of it? Whether it's just having more patience with each other, with the kids, Heidi going on hikes or walks more often, trying to figure out, how we're going to navigate this thing and have some semblance of normalcy or of a life. So the first few weeks was kind of rough, but since that point, I think we've just really looked at what are the opportunities that we have, that whether it's we have more time with each other as a family or, just more times to connect. So I think we've kind of gotten in a decent groove, but as science changes, as this, people's doctors' opinions and the information around it changes, then, so too, we have to kind of adjust around that. But I feel like we've gotten somewhat of a groove.
Good. Reggie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. I think it's been a bit of a roller coaster for us too, or at least for me specifically. I think the struggle with me has been trying to balance my responsibilities at work and then social life with, my own kind of pre-existing medical condition, just because of my kidney. That puts me in a, kind of a high risk thing too. And so, it's like I have my doctor saying, well, you should, definitely work from home. And then my boss saying you should definitely not, kind of just rather you have more here. So, but I think as far as relationally, Miquon and I think the good thing out of this has been, it does force you to be together a lot more. And so, whereas before we were, like a highway, just kind of going and coming. And so now it's giving us a lot more time to bond and get to talk and work with each other. I see y'all laughing.
Nick just showed up behind Clarissa. He's creeping behind her.
Um, and then, Pastor Rob, I got my first assignment too. So I've been working with another organization called Voices for Children. And so that's been a little bit of a challenge too, because I have a child that I've been assigned and I'm trying to work with, and it's pretty, it's a lot. You have to, I need to try to figure out a way how to interact with their teachers and with their schools and with the foster care system and the social workers, and then so I've been kind of struggling with how to do that and how I can be there for this kid who really needs it, and, has just dealing with a lot of stuff, but then been able to protect myself at the same time and not completely disregard a lot of the county ordinances about gatherings and that sort of thing, and not just kind of throwing that to the wind either.
Right.
So,
Clarissa, I think you're the last one, aside from me.
Well, we've still been incredibly busy. I work full-time still. I'm in my master's program. The kids take up all my time. So it's been more work with less getaway. At least before, you can kind of like portion off your life. You're like, okay, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to go run errands. I'm going to go study. But having to do everything at home is definitely a lot more challenging. I think people, we're all humans. We all need our own space, right? So, we try to be conscientious of that for the kids and for ourselves. Similarly to Elisa, we're 6 people in a house. Luckily, we have a yard, so we stick the kids outside a lot. But it's been a lot of work. It's been really nice though to be home. It's nice to, like, for myself, they say that I'm not going back to work like all of 2020. So I take it very seriously. If they're going to say that I can stay home for a whole entire year, something's going on that we need to be cautious of. So it's nice to be with the kids. It's nice to be able to wake up in the morning and roll over and have coffee and then get to work on Zoom. So I'm a bit of an introvert, so I really like being home. So that hasn't been challenging for me. And I've been trying to connect with people more intentionally from church, just to kind of grow some of those relationships that it actually wouldn't have even happened if we were still in normal life. So I appreciate that.
You're stealing some of my thunder. That was one of the questions I was going to ask a little bit with regards to connecting to people. So that's cool. And it seems like there's some common themes, right? So talking about having kids and talking about responsibilities with work and talking about the fact that we are dealing with a serious thing. So from our side, something that Reggie and Elisa, you guys have both mentioned, is the relationships, right? The spousal marital relationship that we have, it does come under a little bit of added stress or added pressure of the fact that you are together all the time. And not to say that I'm unhappy about this, and Nurse is going to watch this at some point later, I'm sure, but absolutely, like there is a challenge, right? Because you do, to Clarissa's point, you do have these compartmentalized places or times that you can go out and be by yourself. Even here within the house, like I now have an office that I can come into and I kind of shut the world out. But we're still in the same space, and trying to find that balance, that happy balance of like, how do we work together through this thing, but also not kill each other in the process, around like personal space and boundaries and time and availability and attention and all those things that kind of fall into dealing with this pandemic and dealing with all the social upheaval, let alone with the kids, right? So, we have Noah and Jonah, and they're both very, very different. You heard Jonah screaming at Fortnite, right? That's his lifeline right now. He's connecting with the outside world through that. Noah, on the other hand, is a very different character, right? So he's very social and wants to be out there and wants to actually be connecting. So he has a job. He's working at Popeyes in Mira Mesa, which is great. It gives him an outlet. where he can be out there. But there's also the risk, right? There's the inherent risk of him dealing with the public in any way, shape, or form as quote unquote an essential worker. He's at risk of getting infected himself or being a carrier at some point. So there is that inherent risk that goes along with it. And trying to balance out that the worry, but also the trust that we're doing what we need to do, right? We're trying to be very careful about how much interaction we're having with people, very selectively where we do have it, and then making sure that we're, doing the face mask and gauging our own self and making sure that we're doing okay. But I hear everyone loud and clear. It sounds like we're all kind of going through the same struggles. Doesn't seem like anyone's going through it with flying colors and like everyone's happy and content. It feels like this is hard, right? This is a challenge, and because it's a challenging time. So to Clarissa's point, connecting, right? So how are you staying in contact with people? Are you staying connected with folks? And then how are you doing it? And what are the challenges? I mean, there's some obvious ones, right? Zoom is not the best mechanism for personal communication sometimes, but how are you doing it otherwise? What are you trying to do, and how's that working? Clarissa, you brought it up, so I'm going to let you start it off.
Oh, okay. So I've just been texting, engaging in social media, calling people. That's about it. I try to avoid Zoom just because of like what you said. I do it so much for work and school. And Zoom, like, it just feels like you can't really have a conversation because you hear a noise and you're like, oh, somebody else's turn. Or are we done with that topic? Are we skipping around? Even now you can see it, like, it doesn't feel like we're just having a conversation. It's kind of like next. So no, I've just been trying to text people, and it's like small stuff because usually like I see people at church, right? And that for me as an introvert is like, cool, I saw them. And now I'm like, I haven't seen them in a while. Even though I never say anything to them, now I like shoot a text like, hey, how you doing? Things like that. And for me, that's been enough.
That's good. And I actually want to dig into that a little bit, right? So going to church is just as much a social thing as it is a mental health thing as it is a spiritual thing, right? And it is important to have that aspect of our lives. So are you getting the response? Are people actually engaging? I know we have all out between you, Narissa, Nick, and I, we have all out like meme conversations, which is great, right? I think that's kept me sane for a majority of this time. But like, how are people responding to you reaching out?
Everyone has been very receptive, but it's like simple stuff, like, hey, how are you doing? Things like that. So everyone's been receptive. It hasn't been like deep dive, full blown, life-changing conversations, but it's been nice.
Cool. Anybody else want to comment on how you're staying in contact with folks?
I think the conversation that I have had have been deep dive, meaningful conversations. We did that third option challenge with Reggie, and he talked about the time the hours that we shared on the protest down in San Diego, and I think y'all are gonna, these schedules still come over for dinner, and for the first a few months ago, for the first few weeks, we did a Zoom call with Eddie Padilla, Joe Sorial, Shane, Dan Dolge, and myself, which is actually, it was Joe Sorial's idea, and kudos to Joe for really stepping up and seeing value in that. I remember when we first were kind of reorganizing the men's group, it was Joe that was saying that, hey, you know what? We talked about, should we meet once a month, once a quarter? He's like, let's meet once a week. Like, we need to get together. And so, for him, he saw value in that. And he continued going forward. So through that group, and, for the past maybe month or two, we've been meeting in person at, each other's houses. And we really have had some deep, meaningful conversations, enough where I think it's probably cat out of the bag, but Dan's getting married, Dan Dolge, and I'm a groomsman. So, we've had those conversations where now he'll call me for random stuff that we wouldn't have talked about before, stuff that's, very personal and intimate stuff. And it's normal now. So I feel like through this, that those kind of relationships that I would normally just say, hey, what's going on, man, on a Sunday, we really have dived deep into it and really fortified that relationship.
Cool. Reggie, Elisa, anything you guys want to add?
So I think that I feel like I've felt a little bit of tension between what is my responsibility. Being, Heidi and I lead the women at our church. And so trying to figure out how to make those she talks as the women ministry keep going and checking in with the women's leaders. And it's interesting because I think that I would schedule those meetings on Zoom out of obligation, but then I would go to them, and even if they were a little bit awkward or maybe just one person would show up, I was like, that was just great. Because unlike me, unlike, people who might be on Zoom for full-time jobs who are completely, zoomed out, I'm like, gosh, it feels awkward at first, but I'm like, I'm still glad I have it. I'm still glad that I'm connecting with, some of these people, because we really took it seriously the whole 3 months without seeing people. And at some point I started breaking, and I was like, I gotta add somebody else into the circle, and so at that point Heidi and I started getting together, and our family started doing watch parties together, or hiking together, or things like that. And that seemed to relieve a lot of the stress for me in being able to connect with people. And in addition, I think a lot of it, I've been asking myself a lot, who is the church? What does the church look like? And for me, I'm like, well, these people, even though they don't go to our church, they're still the church, or my family or my friends. I've used a lot of Marco Polo, where you do videos back and forth between people that are kind of like text messages, but videos, and so I'm finding that I'm connecting with my friend in Japan and my cousin in France, actually probably have been my greatest supports in this time period, even sometimes more than people at our church. However, on the other hand, I've also kind of gotten to know some people a little bit more at our church. Like Reggie wrote a blog post for Average Advocate about his experience as a Black man. So those type of things, I'm like, this is kind of cool, because I didn't know things like that as much or in as much depth as I did before. So I have found that I've gotten to know, or one of the times Denise showed up on a Zoom call, and it was just Denise and I, and I've hung out with Denise, but not that much, so there's been some cool things like that have happened, that I've really appreciated and seen. And one of the huge highlights that I've seen that has come out of this is that we used to be really, really involved in the prayer group, in meeting regularly with them. And so I think in that time period, we were kind of like, how do we do this as a family? So now, when we would usually go to prayer, we've started trying to figure out how do we lead our family? How do we do church as a family? Let's pretend we can never get together with our church family again, God forbid, but what would that look like? How could we do this? How do we lead a church in our own home? And so I think that's been a fun, a hard, not always fun, but a hard practice for us to try to be how do we actually do this? Let's do this. Can we do this well? And I'm starting to be okay, I know we're to the point where we can maybe invite my neighbors into this, or something, do it outside wearing our masks, or I'm not really sure, but just to see that dynamic of things that we wouldn't have necessarily stepped into until COVID happened, I guess.
Okay. Reggie, last but not least.
So I can, like I was saying before, that's kind of one of my biggest challenges is trying to figure out how to maintain connections with people. And so, I mentioned about this kid I just been assigned to. And so that's kind of part of my dilemma with him is, he's been through a lot. He's been in a lot of trouble. He needs a lot of help. He needs a lot of prayer. And so the one thing that I think I'm good at and I'm decent at doing, I can't do it as well as I normally can because of the pandemic. And so I'm limited with him and with being able to connect on the level that I feel like I would normally be able to if we were able to, meet in person and kind of get to know each other and that sort of thing. And so as far as the organization, things that they're trying to do to get around that is, of course, the Zoom conversations and just having Zoom meetings with, with him or his parents or his teachers, that sort of thing. And then the organization itself, doing, just trying to move all the trainings. I think they even have like a book club type thing that's all done remotely. And so basically they're just trying to do everything they can to kind of shift it from being a community or communal centric kind of strategy to a more cyber centric approach.
Virtual environment, virtual coaching. Yep. Okay.
Yep, exactly. And then at work, they kind of have that same challenge there too, because we have several hundred people working for my company, and but because my department and some of the support departments are considered essential, we have to be on site, but they've moved everyone else off site. And so part of our challenge right now is, and actually I'm on the our culture team committee, and so our whole mandate is basically trying to figure out how to maintain the culture for the whole company.
Yep.
Especially during this pandemic when you have people working off-site and, just same thing everyone have been talking about as far as, now they're working from home, trying to do meetings from home at the same time that they're, trying to cook and being caretakers for their families and, just trying to navigate this new dynamic.
The hardest part for me is being the lunch lady for the kids. That's always a challenge. I have my hairnet and everything. It's awful. Thank you for sharing that. That's actually really good, because I think we need to be intentional about this, right? There's no denying the fact that having some sort of intentional, explicit, like, I'm going to make an effort to contact somebody. And whether it's as simple as a text in the case of like Clarissa, or, something like what you're talking about, Reggie, where you're actually making time on a Zoom call and actually having a longer term conversation or meeting with certain groups or certain people, like that in of itself is going to be where we get to our point of intentionality for community. And it can't just be the prayer group. It can't just be the youth. It can't just be the men's group. It's like, we're going to have to learn what these new connections are and start really taking advantage of like making these new connections. And to Elisa's point, like a lot of this stuff wouldn't have happened if we didn't go through this, right? This is a opportunity for us to connect in ways that we maybe never had intentioned or planned on doing. So that's my soapboxing for a little bit. Last question. I know we're kind of running short on time here, but last question. We've seen through all of this, right? Not just in the church, but across the world, people are learning new things. They're baking bread, they're learning instruments, they're painting, they're doing all sorts of different things during this quarantine, during this time, which is kind of crazy, right? It's a worldwide phenomenon. What have you done? What's something that you learned to do and, that you've kind of patted yourself on the back and thought, what, this is kind of cool. I really like being able to do this. Tell us a little bit about one thing that you've done or learned or taken up as a hobby. Reggie, you want to start this one off?
Oh, you're gonna put me on the spot, huh?
I am, yeah. You're the only one that was not muted, so I'm going to keep you on the spot. Hold on. Let me clarify. It's okay if there wasn't anything that you like like no one has to come out of here as Mozart from this quarantine, right? No one has to like, hey, I learned how to play Chopin for the entire life. Like no one's expecting that. I'm just curious to see if anybody.
But what if we did?
Yeah, Mike, I expect that out of you, Mike.
No, I think, yeah, for me, I haven't really been doing anything like that as far as, musically or anything, yeah, like that. But I think for me, the biggest thing has been just kind of like I was saying earlier about just bonding more with Miquon. And it just seemed like pre-pandemic, it was a lot harder to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of our schedules and, just.
And it was like the freeway analogy where you were just passing each other at speed.
Yeah. And so, so I think that's the thing that we need to try to figure out. And I think we were touching on this a little bit in the last Zoom meeting, and Denise was kind of hitting on it a little bit more as far as like what we can do to, how we can better reach people.
Yep.
Because I don't know about you guys, but I was a little bit surprised when she kind of included herself in that group of people that were kind of like on the outskirts and the outliers. And I never saw her that way, but I thought it was interesting that she looked at herself that way. And it made me wonder, like, how many other people in our church are we, kind of missing that's, have similar thoughts about, where they are and what they feel we care about them and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, so that's, I think that's the biggest thing that's been for me in the pandemic. And so for me personally, I got to figure out how to apply this like to my church family, because it's like I have, as I mentioned, the socially, with the kid, we're figuring it out. We're coming up with a strategy. And I definitely got it at work, but like, how can I, what can I do to strengthen it, in the relationship that probably, is the most important. That's the church family.
Yep.
And, and again, that's why I'm really glad, Mike reached out when he did. And I know he and I, like I said, we definitely were able to collect a lot more than pre-pandemic. We might not even been as close as we've been able to do in the last couple of weeks if it wasn't for the pandemic.
Yep.
In a weird kind of way.
So some people have been baking bread. You've just been baking friends, and that's cool. Good. Baking your relationship even more. That's awesome, Reggie. Thank you. Who else? Anybody else learned a new talent or expanded on one that you hadn't realized?
Well, if it's talent, I knew how to read, but I've just been reading more.
That's good. That's a good start.
Yeah. So I'm already literate, but Elisa had let me borrow a book, Letters to the Church. So I think I breezed that book like in a week or so, and I was like, let's just continue this train. So I just finished Start With Why. I have a couple other books that I'm going to be, keeping reading. At the beginning of the year, I had a goal of reading a book a month, and I got away from that. So I'm catching up now on that reading goal.
So what's your number now?
I think I'm on track. And I think I'm at 5. I think I've read so far. So I'll catch up really quick. But yeah, instead of, watching TV at night, it's reading a book or, throughout the day. So just kind of getting away from media stuff and just, diving into a good book or the good book.
Nicely done. All right. For me, I've really expanded on cooking and baking and doing all sorts of things food wise. Like I've really enjoyed that part of the experience. Probably gained more than the COVID-15 was probably claiming it would, but it's been a delicious experience as part of the process. So I've learned how to make pizza much better, which I previously had made pizza, but it's turned into basically a clay brick or clay disc that I can just throw, and it was awful. Now it's actually a pretty good pizza. I made At the beginning, I made pierogi for Narissa, which she's always talked about pierogies, Polish dish with potatoes and onions. It was awesome. What else have I made? Some other random things that have just been a lot of fun to put to use. And I bought a 25 pound bag of flour at the beginning, and Clarissa knows this. I think we shared a few pounds with you guys, but I actually got through all of it within like 2 months. I blew through 25 pounds of flour. So yeah, it's my girlish figure has definitely suffered as a result of that. All right, who else?
Well, to piggyback on that, the flour and yeast that you brought, I've learned how to make pita. So that's really good with the chicken shawarma that we learned how to make. We've been doing a lot of cooking, so we've learned how to make sushi, spam musubi, Korean barbecue.
Okay. All right, so where do we order? Like, because we got to place the order and you just got to deliver it, and I think that's what we need to say.
Clarissa, that's your way to connect. Just make some food and just deliver it to us.
That's right.
You can connect that way.
That could be a thing, but we do a lot of, so everything that we've ever want to go eat, we learned how to make. That way we don't have to go anywhere. We have a pretty robust garden. So we have avocados, green beans, tomatoes, zucchinis, tomatillos, jalapenos, serranos. So we've been trying to start an herb garden. Those keep dying, but just trying to, a little bit of green thumb, a lot of home improvement. Nick and Danny built a fence, doing some other stuff out in the yard. So
is the fence still standing, Nick? Or?
Fence is still standing.
Still upright.
It'll be there for 30 years.
All right, Elisa.
Well, Mike was talking about reading more books. I started learning how to publish books. So that's been new for me because I've never wanted to actually publish anything. But I started working on this particular book about a year ago. And sometime during the COVID time, I was like, I think I'm supposed to publish this one. So I've gotten as far as having multiple readers go through the first copy of the first few chapters. And I'm now in a group that is teaching me, who has a lot of experience in the publishing world and connections with all that, that's teaching me how to write the book proposal, which is, I hands out to all the authors out there, whether your book sells or not, if you can get it published, man, it is a heck of a lot of work if you're not self-publishing. So that has what I've been learning about in the middle of the night when I wake up and the kids are asleep, and I'm like, all right, let's learn how to publish a book and write a book proposal, which is a miserable experience. The writing the book is fun. The book proposal is not fun. So that's what I've been up to.
We noted.
Yeah. Miquon wants to say something too.
Oh my God.
Come on, Miquon. You got to get on camera for this one.
Oh my gosh. Oh, anything else?
He's even putting you in the hot seat too.
Yes. All right. So I learned a couple of things. One, being on camera is not my strong suit. That is funny. Yeah. So we have to do it for work too. So Clarissa, I understand. So I was just on camera all day today. Whatever. And let's see, what else did I learn? I learned that I'm not maybe that bad of a cook. So we had to cook, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week for three months straight. And we're all still alive. The dog is still alive. And I actually learned I don't mind cooking for people. I like to cook. I like to feed people if I don't have to cook it. So like one of my passions is like the food bank or feeding the elderly or children. And, one day when I'm old enough to retire, that'll be what I do. Meals on Wheels, volunteer at the food bank and things like that. That's what I like to do. Mm-hmm. So I also learned that, we had a couple of non-socially distanced people over for a couple times in the month of May, or was it June? in the month of May. And I cooked for them and all of that type of stuff. And they too survived and had second. That was surprising, but so I've learned that. So some of the things that, you think you have a hang up on, or you may not be comfortable with, and things like that, when you're forced to do them, or you have no other choice because it's either eat or starve, cook or not eat, you kind of learn to do those things. And, so I have a little bit of a greater appreciation for that. So,
and not dying is a good floor, a good foundation to build on for future cooking experiences. So that's really good.
And I didn't burn anything. Have I burned
Even better.
Like your house?
Like the house.
She ain't killing nobody.
All right. Good.
Yeah, I didn't burn anything. And the majority of you guys know, Pastor Rob knows this for sure, but I'm extreme introvert. So if you can edit this down to a high, I'm really happy with that. I don't like this whole thing, but it's just a thing. So what? You can't say no. So I don't, anyway, so this isn't like my forte. I don't do pictures, all of this other type of stuff, but you learn when you have to get on camera, and I do what I have to do. So.
Thank you for joining in, Miquon. I appreciate it.
You don't have to thank me, it's fine.
Well, honestly, so I'm more of an ambivert, I guess is the term that I'd use. I'm less, I do need to recharge my batteries pretty regularly on stuff, but then the moment that I'm recharged, I'm like, let's go outside, let's go talk to people. So it is one of those things that I can empathize, and I can totally understand where you're coming from. Narissa is also very, very introverted. So
well, you have a lot of Zoom experience.
It helps
because you mastered this whole thing like a pro. Just sat there, you waited until your husband got home. I see you got your little background going, so you're pretty good at this. That's a master. How do we do a background? Anyway, okay, bye.
Thank you. We'll see you, Miquon. All right, everyone. Well, thanks everyone for joining in. That's all the questions I've got. I've probably got a couple more, but thanks for everyone for participating. This has been really good, and I appreciate the candid feel, the openness, and it's been really good to chat with everybody. So hopefully we'll keep some of these conversations going, and next time somebody else will be able to share their experiences during COVID, and you guys can watch it instead of having to participate all the time. But
yeah, I want to thank Miquon. It was great getting to know you, and I'm going to reach out. See, otherwise I would have never heard you speak.
That's right.
Welcome. Nice to talk to you too.